Good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank the organizer for giving us this opportunity to share our experience and the lessons learned in terms of Philippines coping up with disasters, in particular the Yolanda, that I think everybody would know the havoc that it caused to the Philippine government, to the country. As I have said, I think, if not most of you, you have probably know that the Philippines have always made to the headlines of newspapers, magazines all over the world about the havoc that is being wreaked by several typhoons in the Philippines. And actually, it has already become a way of life, a part of the lives of many people there. It's not only typhoons, but also earthquakes and volcanic eruptions.
Mercy, you're too close to the mic.
Okay. And in November 8, 2013, at about very early in the morning, Yolanda had a landfall in the Western Visayas, the central part of the Philippines, packing with it 270 kilometers per hour of wind velocity and about 361 gusts, and creating a storm surge of about 7 meters or 21 feet, okay? And Yolanda was later reported as one of the strongest and fiercest typhoon that ever happened, not only in the Philippines, but in the world. The devastation occurred despite the new technologies, disaster reduction plan that we had in the Philippines, despite the early warning device that have been developed and put in place. Warnings have been made even days before the Yolanda. Evacuation activities were conducted, but still, we were overwhelmed by the strength of the typhoon that, had a landfall in the Western Visayas. And as you can see, there is about 13 billion of losses and damages that was estimated during that time. Okay. There are about 6,000 people killed and still counting. There are about 12.2 million people affected, 2.6 million families, which are now going to be starting their lives anew, okay? And as we, as the government and as the people really try to, get back and see how all of these things happened, they sort of remembered some shortcomings. One is probably that, many of the local government units were not really that much forceful in, getting these evacuation activities, especially people in the coastal areas, those living in the riverbanks, and those living on the slopes of mountains and hills. And then the other one is that people were not really heeding the warnings that were given to them. Their memories are short in terms of really trying to remember that only about less than a year ago, a typhoon was again, took place in northern Mindanao, wherein, there was big landslides and a lot of people again were killed. And then many people were also not aware that a typhoon like Yolanda would bring about a storm surge. And probably those people in those areas didn't know actually what are storm surge. And lastly, the national government still has this continuous reactive approach to disasters, which made a lot of people really think whether the disaster reduction plans that are in place are really working, or whether, they're wondering whether the operationalization of this disaster reduction plan was really, being done very well. Okay? So there were outpour of support from all over, government, just like what Aceh, generated, global response. But then there was a lot of frustration because the support was really coming very slow. And there are several reasons why, there was a slowdown in the rehabilitation or in the support for relief operation for Yolanda affected areas. One is that the nature and extent of the relief assistance was really scanty. Complete cut-off of power and telecommunication systems. It was really very difficult for us to know the extent of the damage and where these damages are. Okay? The second was that transportation was really cut off. Even the roads are not impassable by foot. And then worse was that there was the breakdown of local functions and the confusion of which government office or which government official, would take on the lead in terms of the rehabilitation. Okay, so what was done was that the government, in the height of the relief and humanitarian operation, a strategic plan embedded in the document Reconstruction Assistance and Yolanda was formulated primarily with the objective of restoring as quickly as possible the economic and social conditions of the affected areas, at the very least to their pre-typhoon conditions, and optimistically higher level wherein they are going to be more resilient to national disasters. Okay? And the RAY, which we call the document, establishes a credible basis to secure international as well as private support for the government recovery and rehabilitation plan. There are key core principles that were followed under the RAY implementation. First would be an institutional arrangement that combines strong central coordination and oversight with flexible implementation at the local level. So it's the local level government units that would be responsible for the implementation, but they should be capacitated in order to be able to develop intervention measures that are really applicable to their place, to their localities. Second is to ensure that the need for the plan to be inclusive, primarily to address the poverty issues that have already been prevalent in those areas. Second is to recognize that the recovery needs of women and men are different. And so there are strategies in the RAY which are addressed primarily for women so that they could be part of the reconstruction more meaningfully. Fourth is that implementation as a whole was phased to meet the critical immediate needs while planning for the sustained recovery and reconstruction, cumulative so that successive phases build on earlier recovery and reconstruction efforts, and flexible to be able to accommodate whatever changes that would take place in the environment. And in order to be able to do that, the investment plan was grouped into a short-term, a medium-term, and a long-term investment plan. And last but not the least was that government recognizes the great participation of private sector, primarily in opening up supply chains, in committing markets for the produced, in fast-tracking logistical arrangements, and the formation of partnership in major investment programs. So with all of those things, what are the key lessons from Yolanda that we are learning? We have learned and we are learning. One would be that defense against disaster starts with a plan. There is a need to regularly review and update disaster risk contingency plan, including the operationalization underground. Second would be that science and technology and good statistics should be able to inform the plans. The use of geohazard maps, for example, would indicate the areas where it should be built in no-build zones. Good statistics and other information would help in designing the appropriate support for rebuilding affected communities. This would also be very helpful in monitoring the performance of the assistance program. Manage risk rather than manage disasters. It's cheaper to build up enhanced resiliency than to invest in recovery or rehabilitation losses. There is also still a need for us to improve our early warning devices, early warning systems, our emergency and preparedness and response activities. And in order for us to be able to do this, it would greatly help, to understand better the natural disasters and the risks, and learn how to appropriately respond to the emergencies. Education campaigns should involve the whole community, including the civil society, and it should really start early in order for even the young people to ingrain in themselves how to respond properly to disasters. All of the above would need to have investment to help strengthen disaster readiness. Investment should be focused even at the basics. For example, protecting the ecosystems by strengthening establishment of mangrove forest to mitigate the impact of typhoons and storm surges, better management of forest and agroforest to prevent landslides, designing infrastructures to be able to weather strong typhoons, floods, and all these things. And last but not the least would be the need for transparency in the relief and recovery operations. Being transparent about where aid goes and how they are used will be helpful will help the government encourage the citizens to be engaged in the recovery process. It can also increase the confidence of donor agencies, countries, and organizations that their aid are really going to where they are intended to. And last but not the least would be really to need to work together as one community and as one nation. Thank you.